I'm observing the systematic destruction of European industrial competitiveness that represents the most predictable economic collapse I've analyzed in 7 decades of studying how energy costs affect manufacturing economics. What's happening across Germany, the Netherlands, and industrial Europe isn't a temporary energy crisis that can be resolved through policy adjustments or alternative suppliers. It's the mathematical end of European manufacturing supremacy and the beginning of the largest capital migration toward American assets that I've witnessed since the Marshall Plan rebuilt Europe after World War II. The numbers tell a story that European political leaders refuse to acknowledge publicly, but that international capital markets are pricing with ruthless precision. German industrial electricity costs have increased by over 300% since the Ukraine conflict began, while American industrial electricity remains 60% cheaper than European rates, even after recent increases. That's not a temporary competitive disadvantage. That's systematic industrial obsolescence that makes European manufacturing economically impossible for energy-intensive industries that form the backbone of advanced economy, employment, and export revenue. What alarms me most about this European energy catastrophe isn't just the immediate cost increases that are forcing factory closures across Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands. It's the systematic destruction of industrial ecosystems that took over a century to develop and cannot be rebuilt once the specialized knowledge, supplier networks, and manufacturing infrastructure gets dismantled and relocated to jurisdictions with sustainable energy policies and competitive cost structures. I've spent my career studying how compound competitive advantages develop over decades through industrial clustering, specialized workforce development, and supply chain integration that creates economic moats protecting entire national economies from international competition. Europe built the world's most sophisticated chemical, automotive, and precision manufacturing industries through systematic energy subsidies that made energy-intensive production economically viable despite limited domestic energy resources. But the green energy transition that European leaders promoted as competitive advantage has become systematic economic suicide because renewable energy sources cannot provide the reliable, affordable baseload power that energy-intensive manufacturing requires to compete with Chinese production costs and American energy abundance. Wind and solar generate electricity when weather conditions permit, not when manufacturing processes require consistent energy input to maintain production schedules and cost competitiveness. The mathematics of industrial energy consumption reveal why European deindustrialization is mathematically inevitable rather than politically negotiable. Chemical production, steel manufacturing, aluminum smelting, and glass production require massive amounts of consistent energy input that costs 3 to 4 times more in Europe than in America or Asia. When your input costs increase by 300%, while your competitors' costs remain stable, you don't have pricing power. You have systematic business failure that compounds until production relocates to economically viable jurisdictions. German chemical giant BASF has already announced systematic production cuts and facility relocations to America and Asia because European energy costs make chemical manufacturing unprofitable at any realistic product pricing. When companies that have operated in Germany for over 150 years start relocating production to Louisiana and Texas, you're witnessing industrial migration patterns that won't reverse for decades, if ever, because the energy cost advantages that America enjoys are structural rather than cyclical. The automotive industry implications cascade through European employment and export revenue because German automotive manufacturers depend on domestic chemical suppliers, steel producers, and precision manufacturing networks that are systematically relocating to energy-competitive jurisdictions. Mercedes, BMW, and Volkswagen cannot maintain competitive production costs when their domestic supplier base faces energy costs that are triple what their American and Asian competitors pay for identical industrial inputs. But here's what should really concern international investors. The European capital flight accelerating toward American assets as European businesses recognize that energy cost structures make long-term European operations economically unsustainable. I'm seeing massive increases in European corporate investment in American manufacturing facilities, real estate acquisitions, and financial asset accumulation as European capital seeks jurisdictions with sustainable energy costs and competitive business environments. The currency implications compound these competitive disadvantages because euro weakness against the dollar reflects international recognition that European economic fundamentals have deteriorated systematically due to energy policy mistakes that cannot be corrected without abandoning the green energy policies that European political systems cannot politically reverse. When currencies weaken due to fundamental economic deterioration rather than cyclical factors, the weakness accelerates capital flight and reduces international investment flows. European pension systems face systematic crisis because they depend on industrial employment and export revenue that are systematically migrating toward energy-competitive jurisdictions. When chemical plants, steel mills, and automotive production facilities relocate to America and Asia, the high-paying industrial jobs that supported European social welfare systems disappear permanently, reducing tax revenue while increasing social support obligations for displaced workers who cannot find equivalent employment in service sectors. The demographic mathematics make European energy crisis even more devastating because aging populations require increased social services while working-age populations decline, reducing the tax base needed to support social welfare systems at precisely the moment when industrial tax revenue is disappearing due to manufacturing migration. European governments face systematic budget shortfalls that cannot be resolved through tax increases on remaining businesses because higher taxation accelerates business migration to more competitive jurisdictions. Regional European banks face systematic stress because they hold massive exposure to industrial loans, commercial real estate, and government debt tied to economic regions dependent on energy-intensive manufacturing. When chemical production, steel manufacturing, and automotive assembly relocate to other continents, the collateral values supporting European bank loans deteriorate systematically while loan demand from viable businesses declines, creating banking stress that compounds the underlying economic deterioration. The Netherlands provides particularly stark illustration of how energy policies can destroy advanced economy competitiveness within a few years. Dutch chemical and shipping industries that dominated European markets for centuries face systematic closure due to energy costs that make operations economically impossible, while government regulations prevent expansion of natural gas production that could restore competitive energy pricing. The Dutch have essentially chosen environmental ideology over economic viability, with predictable results for employment and living standards. Agricultural implications extend beyond industrial manufacturing because European farming depends on energy-intensive fertilizer production, food processing, and transportation systems that become economically unviable when energy costs increase by multiples rather than percentages. European food production costs are rising systematically relative to American and developing country agriculture, reducing European food security while increasing import dependency that drains foreign currency reserves. The geopolitical implications of European industrial collapse extend far beyond economic competition toward fundamental questions about European capacity to maintain technological independence and defense industrial capacity when manufacturing expertise and production facilities systematically migrate to other continents. Advanced economies cannot maintain military technological capabilities without domestic industrial bases that provide specialized materials, precision manufacturing, and engineering expertise. What frustrates me most about this predictable economic disaster is how preventable it was through basic energy security planning and realistic assessment of renewable energy limitations for industrial applications. European leaders chose to prioritize environmental signaling over economic competitiveness, assuming that competitors would follow identical policies that would maintain European competitive parity. Instead, America increased domestic energy production while Asia continued using cost-effective energy sources, creating systematic competitive advantages that European manufacturers cannot overcome. The timeline for European capital migration accelerates as businesses recognize that energy cost disadvantages are permanent rather than temporary disruptions that can be weathered through financial accommodation or operational adjustments. Manufacturing businesses cannot reduce energy consumption below technical minimums required for production processes, and renewable energy cannot provide the consistent baseload power that industrial operations require at costs competitive with natural gas, nuclear, or coal power generation. American regional development benefits systematically from European industrial migration because European companies bring advanced manufacturing expertise, established customer relationships, and substantial capital investment to American communities, offering competitive energy costs and business-friendly regulatory environments. States like Texas, Louisiana, Tennessee, and the Carolinas are experiencing manufacturing renaissance driven by European corporate relocations that create high-paying industrial employment while strengthening American export competitiveness. The investment implications for patient capital require positioning for systematic European industrial decline while participating in American manufacturing renaissance driven by energy abundance and regulatory competitiveness. European assets face systematic headwinds that will persist for decades, while American industrial assets benefit from structural competitive advantages that compound over time as more European production migrates to energy-competitive American locations. International trade relationships shift systematically as European import dependency increases, while export competitiveness deteriorates due to energy cost disadvantages that affect every aspect of industrial production from raw materials processing through finished goods manufacturing. European trade deficits will expand systematically as domestic production becomes economically unviable while consumption levels require increased imports from energy-competitive producers. The social implications cascade through European political systems as industrial job losses concentrate in manufacturing regions that supported pro-European integration parties, while displaced workers increasingly support nationalist parties promising to restore industrial competitiveness through withdrawal from European Union energy policies. Political instability increases as economic deterioration continues, creating additional uncertainty for international investors considering European asset allocation. Currency debasement becomes systematic as European central banks face pressure to accommodate economic decline through monetary expansion that reduces currency purchasing power while failing to restore industrial competitiveness because energy costs represent real resource constraints that cannot be solved through financial engineering. European inflation will persist even during economic contraction because energy import dependency creates cost-push inflation that monetary policy cannot address without destroying remaining economic activity. The insurance industry implications affect European financial institutions because industrial facility closures, unemployment increases, and government fiscal stress create systematic increases in claims while reducing premium revenue from declining business activity. European insurance companies face deteriorating underwriting ratios that force capital reallocation toward more stable jurisdictions with better long-term economic prospects. European real estate markets, particularly commercial and industrial properties, face systematic value destruction as energy-intensive businesses relocate to other continents while remaining businesses contract operations to reduce energy consumption. Industrial real estate becomes stranded assets when energy costs make manufacturing operations economically impossible, while commercial real estate suffers from reduced economic activity and employment levels. What concerns me most about European energy crisis is the systematic nature of the competitive disadvantages that cannot be resolved through temporary policy adjustments or international energy market stabilization. European governments committed to renewable energy mandates that require dismantling reliable baseload power generation, while renewable alternatives cannot provide the consistent, affordable energy that industrial competitiveness requires. The technological implications extend beyond immediate energy costs toward European capacity to maintain leadership in advanced manufacturing technologies that require massive energy inputs for development and production. Semiconductor manufacturing, advanced materials production, and precision chemical processes cannot operate economically when energy costs exceed competitive thresholds, regardless of technological sophistication or workforce expertise. Patient capital must recognize that European energy crisis represents systematic economic decline rather than cyclical disruption that will resolve through market adjustments or policy interventions. The energy cost differentials that favor American and Asian production are structural rather than temporary, creating permanent competitive advantages for jurisdictions with abundant energy resources and pragmatic energy policies. The compound timeline for European industrial migration extends over decades rather than years because manufacturing relocation requires substantial capital investment and workforce development in destination countries, while existing European facilities face gradual obsolescence rather than immediate closure. But the direction is mathematically determined by energy economics that European policymakers cannot alter without abandoning environmental commitments that have become politically impossible to reverse. Markets reward competitive positioning and punish systematic disadvantages with precision that compounds over time, regardless of political preferences or historical relationships. European energy policy mistakes have created systematic industrial obsolescence that will persist until energy competitiveness gets restored through policies that prioritize economic viability over environmental signaling. But European political systems appear incapable of implementing such pragmatic adjustments before industrial migration reaches irreversible levels.